If you're an experienced coach, consultant, or subject matter expert who's trying to design an online course and you feel overwhelmed, stuck, or quietly frustrated, I want to start by naming something clearly. That feeling does not mean you're doing something wrong. In fact, most of the time, it means the opposite. It usually means you know your topic well enough to see how much there actually is. And that's an important distinction because beginners don't usually feel this kind of overwhelm. They feel uncertainty, they feel confusion, they wonder if they even know enough to get started. Overwhelm tends to show up later when you understand the landscape of your subject well enough to see all of the paths at once. I see this pattern constantly with smart, capable professionals, people who are good at what they do, people who have helped clients, led teams, solved real problems. They come into course design thinking things like, I should be able to figure this out. I know this material, so why does this feel harder than it should? If that sounds familiar, then this video is for you. Because the issue almost never comes down to intelligence, discipline, or effort. It comes down to how you're approaching course design. Let me describe what this overwhelm often looks like in practice. You sit down to outline your course. You start with good intentions. You tell yourself you're just going to get the structure down. So you create a module, then another. Put a few bullet points under each one. Then you add a note that says, explain this more later. You step away. But then you come back the next day and somehow, instead of feeling clearer, the outline feels heavier. So you reorganize. You move sections around, rename modules. You collapse 2 lessons into one and then split them back apart again. From the outside, it looks like you're working. You're spending time on it. You're engaging seriously with the material. But internally, it feels uncomfortable. You're thinking things like, everything feels important. I don't know where this should actually go. Or I'm worried I'll leave something out. That internal tension is important because it tells us you're not struggling with motivation or effort. You're struggling with prioritization. And that's when a very specific word tends to show up. Simplify. I just need to simplify this. I need to make it cleaner. I need to cut it down. But simplify what? Without a clear sense of what matters first, simplification becomes random, and random cutting rarely creates clarity. Often, it just creates more doubt. Here's the misdiagnosis most experienced experts make at this stage. They assume the problem is too much content, so they try to solve it by cutting. They remove lessons, they shorten videos, they collapse modules, and sometimes that helps, temporarily. But then the overwhelm comes back, because the problem was never the volume. The problem was that everything felt equally important. When everything feels equally important, nothing feels clearly necessary. That's not a content problem. It's a design problem. More specifically, it's a signal that you're organizing information instead of designing learning. Those two things feel very similar when you're inside of them. Both involve structure. Both involve clarity. Both involve making decisions. But they're solving different problems. Organizing information is about grouping ideas in a way that makes sense to you. Designing learning is about sequencing experiences in a way that makes sense to someone else. And when you organize without sequencing, you end up with something that's technically sound, but experientially flat. There's no momentum, no sense of direction, just a collection of well-organized ideas. So you keep tweaking, not because you're careless, but because your brain is trying to find that missing signal. This pattern shows up most often with experts for a very specific reason. Expertise changes how you experience your own material. When you were new to your field, each step felt distinct. You remember moments of confusion. You remember not knowing what mattered yet. But you probably haven't been new in a long time. And those steps compress over time. You don't consciously feel the friction anymore. So when you design a course, you're not naturally thinking, what does someone need to know first? You're thinking, what do they need to know? That difference matters because learning doesn't happen by exposure. It happens through progression. It happens when one insight prepares someone for the next. When that progression isn't clear, learners feel lost. And when you can't see the progression logically yourself, design feels exhausting. This is why overwhelm is such a reliable signal. It's not telling you that you're incapable. It's telling you that the journey hasn't been made explicit yet. And that's incredibly hard to do from inside your own expertise. Here's the distinction I want you to sit with. Content is what you know. A learning path is how someone becomes more capable over time. When you design a course by content alone, you're asking learners to navigate without a map. And when you don't have a map, everything feels heavier than it needs to be. This is also why advice like just start recording often backfires. Recording commits you to decisions you haven't clarified yet. It locks in confusion instead of resolving it. Clarity doesn't come from action alone. It comes from intentional sequencing. And sequencing is the part that most people try to skip, not because it's unimportant, but because it's uncomfortable and it's invisible. You don't get immediate proof that you're doing something, and it can feel like spinning your wheels. But it's also the part that changes everything. If this is resonating, there are a few things I want to name, not as rules, but as gentle guardrails. When you're feeling overwhelmed, the instinct is to do something, to move, to push forward. That instinct makes sense. But some responses at this stage feel productive and actually make things harder. One is starting to record too early. Recording feels like progress because it's visible. You're finally building something. But when the learning path isn't clear yet, recording doesn't create clarity. It commits you to decisions you haven't made conclusively. You end up with content that you later have to undo or work around. Another common response is reorganizing the outline again and again. Renaming modules, moving lessons, rearranging pieces. If the path isn't visible yet, reshuffling content won't reveal it. And the last response is assuming this is a personal issue, that you're procrastinating, that you lack confidence, that you're somehow not disciplined enough. Most of the time, overwhelm isn't about effort or confidence. It's simply what happens when the learning path isn't clear yet. If you're listening to this and thinking, yes, this explains exactly why I feel stuck, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not behind. You haven't failed to figure something out that everyone else magically understands. You've reached the point where doing this alone is inefficient. Not because you're incapable, but because perspective is limited from the inside of your expertise. When you're deeply familiar with a subject, it's very hard to see the learning journey clearly. That's why guided support matters in course design. Not to tell you what to teach, not to give you more ideas, but to help you see that learning path clearly. That's exactly what CTHQ is built to support. So if this resonated, Take that seriously, not as pressure to act, but just as information. You're not failing. You're right on time. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next video.